You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today is kind of a follow-up episode. Olivia Swindler is our guest today, and she was on back in November of 2021. And so we're going to do a follow-up and just kind of check in and see where she is at today. Olivia, so welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, well, it's exciting to have you back. Now, to recap, your story. First of all, listeners, if you want to listen to the original podcast, just go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up this episode, and I will link it to the original episode. But back in, 2020 when COVID first hit, you were in France in lockdown by your lonesome, and your roommates were stuck in the States.
Yes.
And that period of self-reflection is kind of what helped you to, if I recall correctly, end a really bad relationship. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or
mostly. So the relationship had already
relationship.
Yes.
Okay.
The relationship had ended, but I think in my life I have the tendency to go.
Mm-hmm.
And COVID for me and most people kind of caused me to stop. And I think that it gave space to process that. So even though the relationship had ended, that was an opportunity to really to process and work through kind of what had happened.
Gotcha. That's right. So I know those first few months of lockdown, they were really hard for you because you were alone. You're in a new country, in a new apartment, new sounds and, bumps in the night. So, tell us a little bit how you have adjusted and everything since all of that.
Yeah. I think I learned so much about myself in that experience. I think my mentor always says that you have to choose your hard. So it was super hard to live through that experience and to be by myself and to try to figure out navigating life. But it would have been hard to not. It would have been hard to just sit at home and think, if only I was putting myself out there and trying to adjust. And so I think that perspective has really helped as I've had to learn and grow and trying to reframe like maybe perceived failures and really reframe them as learning experiences and just an opportunity to grow. And so I think as I've been here, really trying to let go of any expectation of it will look like this and just saying, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing. And maybe that's okay. That's really hard for me to say, but maybe that's okay. And how can I use these really difficult experiences to learn and to grow in myself?
I think a lot of us kind of took time to have some of that self-reflection because you're right. The world pretty much came to a halt and we all were just forced to stop. In the days of the rat race, we all got off that wheel, the hamster wheel or whatever you want to call it. And it was just kind of like, okay, now what do we do? We've watched Tiger King. What next?
That was a high moment of the pandemic.
I'm telling you, we've watched Tiger King. We have played I Spy on Facebook, with all the different colors and so now what? Oh, now we got to look at ourselves. What? But I think, I think while the pandemic had so much negative stuff, of course, I also think a lot of positive came from it because we were forced to slow down, to spend time with our family, to spend time alone, and to, really kind of rethink our lives and our purposes.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And, I know for me, I've made, it's caused me to make several different changes. But so, I guess, where are you at today? You're still in France?
I am. I'm still in France. With my job, I do need to come back to America for a year. So that is a change that is on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
But still in France, I still love being in France. And I think that when I tell people, especially before I moved, that I'm going to France, I think what they see is Emily in Paris and just this really romanticized view of, oh, you're probably eating a baguette with your big glass of wine on your balcony. And it's, yes, but also it's hard. And I think that we can like look at other people's lives and think, oh, but you're living in France. And I think that what that says is, well, you shouldn't have a difficult time with this because you get to live in this really cool place. And I never want to take for granted the fact that I live in a really cool place, but at the same time, like life still happens. I still stub my toe. It's still real life. And so I think that kind of overcoming that mindset has been helpful for me to actually make France my home.
I can, in a way, I'm jealous, because I've always wanted to go back to Italy. That's where my ancestors are from. That's, it was always one of those, if I didn't have kids, I would have packed myself up and gone to Italy. But, life in a foreign country, I did spend some time up in Canada. So for me, that's as foreign as it gets. But life in a foreign country is not always romantic and amazing, especially when you first get there and there's all the adjustments and different cultures. People do things differently. They expect things differently. And then there's the government and all the people work. And, I don't know about you, but when my husband came down here from Canada, we probably killed about 3 trees of paperwork for the government for immigration. But so, living abroad or living in another country definitely has its downfalls, just like living at home.
Exactly. It's exactly that. And I've heard from my friends who have moved to English speaking countries that was almost more difficult than if they would have moved to somewhere where they don't speak English, because at least going to France, I knew, okay, I'm going to have to learn a new language. But if you're going to Canada or England, they speak the same language. So things should be easy, but I don't think that that's the truth.
Now, when I lived in Canada, well, I was a sophomore in high school when I lived in Canada, but I had never thought about Canada. I was a teenager. I knew it was up. That's all I knew. And so there was a big culture shock. I lived in Vancouver, so it was still big and bustling and all of that, but there was Canadian history. I'm pretty sure I failed history because I was like, okay, you guys have had 10 years of learning this stuff. I have no clue. And then there was things like people asking me, well, do Americans think we live in igloos? I'm from Montana. So one of the things I'll never forget is actually one kid asking me where in California Montana was, because to them, when you think of America, you think of California. So those different types of realizations and eye-opening learning experiences was really interesting. How the schools were completely different. And just expectations.
Yeah. And I think expectations is such an important phrase, because I think that we put these expectations on ourselves and of these experiences and of what a culture or society will be. And I think that at the same time, those expectations are put on us, like as an American, you must be from California, those sorts of things that like, no, that's isn't that obvious? But I think the cultural expectations go both ways, and it's such an interesting and important thing to figure out how to navigate.
Yeah. And I'm curious, are you experiencing or have you experienced any pushback to being an American in France? I mean, I've always heard that the French really don't like us, you know, and then you think about how many Americans here treat people from South America. You know, are you experiencing or have you experienced anything like that?
Not from anybody I know. Like, I have a good amount of French friends, and they have embraced my loud voice and over enthusiastic personality, and bless them for that. But there are sometimes, like, I was just walking down the street once with my friend who's actually British, and we were just chit-chatting about nothing. And this older man came up to us, and he was actually very kind, but he came up to us and he said, "Do you speak this loud in your own country?" And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Do you speak this loud?" And I'm thinking we're talking in a normal voice. And it was just interesting. So I've had things like that where people want to understand. During presidential elections is always interesting because people want to talk politics, and I don't really have the patience to explain politics in English, let alone French. And so that's interesting to navigate. But I think 9 times out of 10, people are so kind. And especially like in America, I would say this is true as well. Language is super important. And so if you go into a place speaking French, even if it's not perfect, they will work with you, and they're so kind. And I think most people I've encountered really want to help you and give you the vocabulary. And so I think that's a really wonderful experience. So most of my interactions have been really, really great.
Well, that's good. That's good. My French is so bad. My French is like 9th grade, first year French, and from 30 years ago. But gosh, I just think it would be so much fun to just go and immerse yourself in a whole new culture. What about relationships? What are relationships like over there? Both romantic,
like you mean romantic relationships
and platonic? Yeah.
So platonic that's an easier one to answer. So the platonic relationships, the French are interesting and difficult to get to know, not in a bad way, but just, I think as Americans, we're overly friendly, which is a good thing and a bad thing. And the French are way more reserved. And so like I've had friends for years, and it's taken that long to be able to have like a deep conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas I know a French couple that they moved to California, and everyone was asking them, "How are you doing? How are you?" And they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, we moved to America and we're so popular." And so they, after being asked about the 8th time by their bags boy at the grocery store how they were doing, they invited him over for dinner, and he was like, "What?" Because to them, they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, you care about us. We're new here. This is a great experience." And so that's just an adjustment. I think dating relationships, especially during COVID, that's a whole different thing.
That was tough anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Seriously. I would say it is a lot more casual than in the States. And my friend told me this the other day, and I think that this is true. Like 45% of marriages here are open marriages. So it's just a lot more, depending on what cultural group you're associated with, but it can be a lot more casual, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Interesting. Yeah. So how are things going with the book? Is there another book on the horizon?
Yeah. So I am so just like overjoyed with the way that people have loved the book and said that it has spoken to them. And I just am thrilled. So I am so grateful. I just have this attitude and posture of gratitude about it. I wrote that book during a lockdown. And a couple of months later, France went back into lockdown and I ended up writing another book.
Oh, you did?
I did. I got really bored and I really love to write. And so it was like a little writing retreat. And so I'm working on the finalizing the manuscript of the second book. It's not the same characters, not the same world, but still women's fiction. I think it's really important to tell the story of women. I think that fiction is such a powerful tool to learn about ourselves and learn about other people's experiences. So hopefully that will see the light of day soon.
Awesome. That's great. Well, let me know when it does, and we'll make sure we add it to your show notes and everything. So, well, Olivia, thank you so much for coming back on and just giving us kind of an update of how you're doing and all of that. This has been fun catching up.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
And listeners, as always, I will have all of Olivia's contact information in the show notes, as well as the link to her original episode, so you can listen to that as well. And the link to her book, Cynthia Starts a Band. So definitely check that out. If you're listening to us from one of our platforms, one of the apps, iHeart, Apple, Google, whatever, give us a like, give us a follow, and we'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.